Okay, well, I've hit the record button, so I guess we're ready to go. If you all don't mind, I think I'm going to stay seated tonight. I'm sure you all online don't care, so you get to sit in your chairs, huh? So that's a bonus on your part. All right, well, tonight we're going to talk again about soil management. And I know we've covered soils in just about every class that we've had, but I wanted to talk about soils as in the residential landscapes, because it's a little bit different than what you think of as traditional agriculture. Now, when Hebron spoke about soils, he was absolutely correct, but he was looking at it from the viewpoint of a row crop farmer. And I want to look at it from the aspect of a new homeowner. Maybe you've moved into a new home, they've taken that good soil away, and we want to talk about how to bring it back to life and some of those types of characteristics, and go back over how to gather your soil test and some things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And I believe I hit record. Yep, I hit record. Okay. Button. Okay, there we go. So basically our soil, what role does the soil fill? Okay, we know that it helps hold up the plants, gives it physical support, holds water for plant uptake. It holds nutrients for the plant to uptake. It maintains the air near the root systems for respiration. It also breaks down to release the plant nutrients, and it cycles nutrients. So our soil is very important, but we also have to consider the air and water are also important components down to the in the root system around the plant. Sometimes that we forget that even in the soil, we need spaces of water and for air, both. You don't want too much air or you get dry pockets where you've planted your tree, but there is a certain amount of air, and those things work together to help hold your plants up and support them. So today we're going to be looking at just understanding some of the soil functions that we've talked about and indicators of soil quality. We're going to be looking at how your soil attributes can be improved with organic matter. OM stands for organic matter. Looking at the explaining how to take a soil sample, and we're going to go over some interpretations of the soil report. And I'll ask you all to be patient with me because I'm not a math person. I put it all into the formulas myself. When I get the numbers and the soil test, and we come as close as we can on making our recommendations. We're also going to look at different types of fertilizers, the materials, the form that the fertilizer comes to you, and their benefits and limitations, and then just look at some of the common soil organisms that need to be in the soil to support plant growth. So again, overview of soil quality. We're going to look at the soil physical properties, the chemical properties, and the biological properties of the soil. Okay, this slide's kind of hard to see. We have to stand up and read. Okay, so what is soil quality? This is based off of NRCS, that's a Natural Resource Conservation Assessment. And when we look at soil quality, like when I do a farm visit, it's going to be one of the first things that I recommend is that we start pulling some soil samples and we look. And so we'll look at the biological diversity. If your soil is really compact and you've got a lot of clay and you're seeing a lot of gray in the soil, it's probably going to be pretty waterlogged. It's not going to be conducive to growth. And so I like to see those things right offhand if I can while I'm on a farm visit. We want to look at the soil quality as far as how does it regulate the flow of water. If you've got a real swampy area, does that the water pool up in an area and then cause a stream of erosion when it goes over? So it causes trenches and erosions. So it's about recognizing those things in the environment. Your soil also serves as a buffer. It's a filter for everything that goes into the soil. When we have rain, the water flows and it goes through the pores, and it kind of cleans it up before it gets down to the groundwater and out to the streams. At least that's what we want to happen. Stormwater is kind of, well, they've got it set up in Clarksville. It's kind of bad because stormwater goes directly into the river. There's no filtration on it. It just goes directly into the river. So, but a lot of your chemicals and things like that, they don't get, like they were to go through the water treatment plant, it wouldn't take out the chemicals that are in the water anyway. So it all ends up going into our streams, into the ocean and things like that. So by using our plants and our grasses, that is a buffer and it is a natural filtration for our water that's going through the soil. It also provides support, physical stability for plants and animals and structures. Yeah. Moving around. Yeah. All right, so when we look at soil qualities, we're going to look at some indicators on diversity, biological diversity. You want to have a lot of microorganisms and worms and even those nasty mole crickets that we don't like, and grubs, because they all help to kind of aerate the soil. You want to make sure that water and the solution or the overflow, can flow, drain into the system and go off into the rivers and streams. It does help to filter, buffer, and the degradation of the soil can be caused by erosion. Our soils are part of the nutrient and carbon cycling and storage, and then stability, source of physical support for your plants. So when you look at this little chart, water holding capacity, it's gonna be diverse, it's gonna be biological, it's gonna have the water flow, and it's gonna have a lot of nutrient carbon cycling. Bulk density has everything but the filtering. So earthworms present, water infiltration, organic matter, soil structure, all of those things go together to indicate your overall structure and quality of the soil that you have. So this table is actually an abbreviated version of the NRCS soil quality indicator sheet that is found in your supplemental materials in your book. It's just a way of describing the ways and the different measurable features of the soil and how they relate to the quality and function of the soil in the environment. Read my notes. So organic matter. So what do we consider organic matter? What would be some examples?
Decomposing leaves.
Okay, decomposing leaves.
Compost.
Okay. Manures. Okay. So any type of organic matter that is as long as it's not got food products in it, such as bones and meats and fats. So your banana peels, anything like that, lettuce, your vegetables, all of that would be good to make into compost, and that turns into organic matter that kind of brings our soil back to life. So by adding organic matter to your soil, you're going to improve the water holding capacity, the nutrient holding capacity. It does add some nutrients, and we're going to talk a little bit about the manure crops and how you can add in the nutrients in the soil. It increases your soil structure. And we've talked a little bit about how on these new housing developments that your soil structure is just all messed up by the bulldozing and the moving of heavy equipment and things like that. And so it does help increase that soil structure. Or there are methods that can help increase the soil structure. It reduces the bulk density and it helps with compaction, reduces crusting on the soil, and improves the infiltration of the water as it comes through. And it increases that biological activity that we want to see happening in the soil, that biodiversity and the nutrient cycling. So the soil structure and water, some of the impacts on this are going to be the aeration in your soil. Of course, if you have a compact soil, you're not going to have very much aeration, are you? Okay, so you're not going to have enough air down in the soil. It's going to be compacted. It's going to be hard like a brick. That's not what we want. So infiltration and runoff. If you have a well aerated soil, then that water is going to slow down and it's going to soak in and it's going to go into the groundwater system like it's supposed to. But if all your topsoil is removed and it's just left bare, there's nothing there. Or if you think about our hardscapes, driveways, highways, parking lots, all those things would be hardscapes and the water is going to run off. And so it's like erosion. And so you have to look at that too. Water movement, your soil is going to control the water movement. Water holding capacity is going to be based on the texture of the soil, the parent soil that you have, and then just overall the soil biology. As you can see in the pictures, they've just got some angular blocks of soil. And so you just think of it as a cube or different sized cubes in the soil. And so you can have a very fine soil, fine, medium, coarse, or very coarse to rocky soil. And I think most of us are used to seeing the very coarse to rocky soil. Because I know I spent 5 years picking up rocks that were about yay big around. That's big. And putting them in pots everywhere. And there they sit. So what we want our soil to look like. Okay, if you look toward the right, how's that soil look to you all? They're here. It looks hard. It looks compacted. Do you see very many roots at the bottom? No. Okay. So that plant has pretty much hit its hard pan. You've heard that term before. We've talked about a hard pan. So it's reached its depth and it's not going to go any further. Okay. But if you look at that middle picture, you're seeing a little bit better. You're seeing more of a silty loam. And you can see the roots at the base of the plant or the base of that soil sample. They pulled up a plug out. And then this first one here looks really good. You've got kind of a dark color. It's nutrient rich. It's got a lot of roots coming through there. And so that grass is going to be very healthy compared to the one on the far right. So the left is what we want our soil to look like, to be friable, to be workable, to a happy place for the roots to live. And so by adding organic matter, you're going to get to that point. So you can take the one on the right and you can make it into the one in left by the addition of organic matter over time. So a healthy soil structure, again, the movement of the water goes into the soil from the ground surface, and it's going to depend on the texture and the structure. So we talked about those little cubes. We have little cubes of different soil types. Okay, we have a sand grain. We might have organic material, and then you have pores in between. And so the water can get through that pore space. So you want a certain amount of pore space in your soil so that water can filter through. Okay, so that would be a nice, good soil. But when you take that soil and you've got construction, you've got equipment coming in, you're working the soil to the same depth each year. And unfortunately, this is a traditional farming practice. You're growing row crops, you're typically plowing and tilling at the same depth. Sometimes, the farmers will have to get a tool and they will rip the soil. They will get down into the subsoil because they're losing their topsoil. And so they're trying to get that subsoil to come up, and they may plant a cover crop to increase their topsoil again, because they're constantly, you need to replace what you're constantly taking out. So some of our traditional practices could be changed in order to protect the soil. I mean, they have over the years. If you think about, soil conservation really came to be back in the days of the 40s when we had the Dust Bowl that started in Texas. Okay, they were doing so much agriculture. It's like, yeah, we're producing food. We're raising cattle. We're doing this. We're doing that. Wow, where's our soil going? All of a sudden, it's going to dust because they overplowed. And when you plow your soil or you till it over and over again, it becomes finer and finer. And so those little aggregates or those little cubes are no longer little cubes. They're just kind of flat and they stick together, and then you go back and you have that hard clay, and it's just not a happy place for the roots to grow. So we've talked about working the soil when it's wet. That changes those aggregates, it changes those little cubes, and it makes it lumpy, it makes it crusty. You have big clumps. So you want to wait in the spring until that soil is good and friable that you can reach your hand up in and squeeze it, and it doesn't have a bunch of water coming out. I mean, really, you're a good friable soil will be where you can reach down, grab a hand, and you can start making a kind of a ribbon with it. You can take it, just make a ribbon with it, and it will just kind of break apart, or it might make a solid little ribbon out of clay. That's when your soil is workable. I mean, if you pick it up and you squeeze it and it goes, it's too wet to work. And, I guess you could overwork it when it's dry too, but mainly we worry about the working it while it's wet. So you don't want to break up all these crumbs. You don't want to destroy that soil structure because then it creates this crust that's tightly packed. Then you plant your seeds and your seeds can't get up through that because it's got a hard crust on it. And so then you have the large blocks with a few cracks, and then you've got soil compaction. So when it rains, it's going to get down, through this top part here, right here, and then it may flood, because it's not draining down through the subsoil. So by over-tilling, overworking the soil, you're creating that subsoil compaction area. Okay. So compacted soils, we just have less space in between. There's nowhere for the water to go. And so without it being able to absorb and work its way down into the soil, what's going to happen? It's either going to pond on top of the soil, or it's going to run off, and you're going to have erosion problems. So man has a lot of impact on soil. Removing topsoil, compaction with heavy equipment. Some of our practices do increase erosion. It does reduce the organic matter over time. Soil pollution. We have a lot of industry in Tennessee, and that's just the way it is. You're going to have, if you're making vehicles, you're making batteries, you're making things like that, you're going to have a lot of lead and different things like that, unfortunately, in your soil. And we're in one of those areas where you can have those types of things in your soil. So soil pollution, and then we have reduced infiltration, and then which equals runoff. And so some of the practices that could be put into place is like in town, if like new developments or new parking lots, you can actually get concrete. What's the word? It's not corrugated. I'm thinking cardboard now. This type of concrete that has little holes in it where the water will filter through into a system underground rather than just running directly off. Okay, so there's things like that. You can build sidewalks out of the concrete that's made like that. It's just got little holes in it. And that helps you get rid of just the asphalt or just flat concrete and use these other types of materials where that water can be slowed down, make it absorb, and then you have less runoff. Okay. So are y'all scared to soil test? Do you think you'll fail? Okay, you cannot fail your soil test. That's one thing I always like to tell people. You cannot fail your soil test unless you don't collect it right. Then you might fail your soil test. I guess that's one way you could fail it. So soil test, if you're in a new house, you've just bought the property, you don't know what other people have done to it, get your soil tested first. And then you're probably going to have to add some organic matter. Then you're going to look at your site management. What do you want to grow? What are your goals? Perfect lawn. Do you want an orchard? Do you want a beautiful landscape, trees, site management? And then you're going to amend your soil based on what you want to plant, based on what those plant cultural needs are, the pH, the nutrients they need. And then if your soils are really not ideal, then you may have to go to raised beds or containers, or just do some kind of raising up of the soil, or a hydroponics. A lot of systems out there you can buy now, and just put a little hydroponic system out on your front porch. You can even bring them in, put them in your kitchen, and grow greens during the winter. But the larger ones, you can grow tomatoes and peppers and things like that. So if you have extra lighting, you can bring those things inside, and still continue to grow in raised beds or containers. But that's another topic. So this here, I didn't really pull any soil profiles to look at, but I think the challenges with soil reports in our urban areas is, one thing is because that layer of topsoil is gone, and you're pulling from the subsoil, which means that it takes a lot of work to grow grass, from one thing, in Tennessee. Okay, a lot of your other plants can adapt a little better, but your turf grass just doesn't like our soil here. And when you're left with the subsoil, it's hard, it's rocky, it's clay, and it just doesn't like to grow here. So that's something we see in urban areas. It's this very compacted soil. I'm going to go ahead and skip over this since we don't have an example here. Okay, managing the physical properties of the soil. Some of the things that we can do to better our soil: cover crops, green manures, the addition of manure, compost, soil conditioners, ditches or tile, and then we'll look at erosion and tillage. So your cover crops, and I'm a big one on cover crops. I have been over the past 3 years. I've really been pushing the cover crops because I've seen on my own property what it can do to the soil over just a matter of a couple of years. Your cover crops, you have fall cover crops and you have spring cover crops. So right now, if you wanted to, if you can get into your garden to till it up, just plant it with a cover crop. You may want to plant some wheat, some rye, plant some turnip greens or turnips, radishes, things of that nature. Crimson clover is another one, some type of bean, so that you're adding nitrogen. But you can put that over your garden area now, after you've cleaned up everything, after it quits producing, clean that up, plant a cover crop, and then till that under the next year, and that adds to your soil structure, builds the microorganisms in the soil, and actually creates soil over a number of years. Okay, so we can make our own soil. It just takes a while. As we always say, God isn't making any more land, and that's for sure. So we need to protect what we've got left and try to build up the soil that we've got. So, yes.
Question. In the book, it's talking about vetch.
Yeah.
They're talking about crown vetch.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is horrible. I mean, it's
Crown.
super invasive. I mean,
Yes.
Field, okay, maybe.
Yes.
But in your yard, if you get that stuff on,
Yes.
it is like impossible to get rid of.
Yes, the comment for everybody online was on crown vetch. Yes, it can be very invasive in your yards, and in some states it is considered invasive. When I lived in Missouri, crown vetch was an invasive crop. You were not supposed to use it. It got here from the highway department for erosion control. Just same way we got kudzu.
Like the roads go like
Yep.
this, and they build those bridges.
Mhm. Yep.
And it's super bad,
Mhm.
but it is horrible in your yard. If
Yes.
You are not gonna get rid of it.
Yes, once it gets out of place and it
Birds
seeds,
plant it where you, I mean, you think you got it gone and blow it the hose. It doesn't go like
there it
that.
goes. Yep. Yep. So the vetch is something you got to kind of be careful with. You might want to leave that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, leave that out unless it's just a pasture, that you're really not worried about. So, so some of our cover crops are in the grass family: the rye, wheat, barley, oats. These are easy to establish. I mean, you just need to create a good planting bed. And I always say lightly till, and that's because once I establish a garden bed and I've tilled deeply, I've tilled about 6 to 8 inches deep, and I've tilled my organic matter in, I don't really want that tiller in that garden again, even for weed control in between the rows. Okay. Because again, we talked about earlier, compaction and texture, and those little cubes and cubelets, you're destroying those every time you till. And so by using these cover crops, you're going to reduce that need for tillage, and you can plant within the cover crop residue. So they're easy to establish. You get a high biomass, a lot of material. Wouldn't you rather grow your own than pay $7 for a bale of straw? I would in my garden. and know that it hadn't been sprayed with anything. So it is slow to break down, but it does prevent erosion, and it often outcompetes weeds. So this is a young annual rye crop that we're seeing in here, that bright green. You can always recognize the annual rye. It's always a brighter green color than the fescue. But it's going to improve that soil tilth that I've mentioned. It's also helps control, well, it's not a host for nematodes. So if nematodes are not going to want to get on this plant. So it's kind of, I guess you could consider it a deterrent, because they're not going to want to get on those. It scavenges nitrogen to prevent some of the leaching. So it takes up, if you put extra nitrogen on there, that rye is going to take it up and use it instead of it just going, along with the water leaching out into the groundwater. And they work well with a legume crop, which we're going to talk, legume, a bean. So basically your cover crops with legumes, your beans will add nitrogen to the soil as they break down. And so what's that going to do in the end? What do you think that's going to do if you're adding natural nitrogen? Got to make your garden greener. What are you going to have to use less of? Fertilizer. All right. So if you plant a legume and you till that under, let it lay and decompose, it's going to add a certain amount of nitrogen, and that nitrogen is readily available to the plants. It's in a form that's readily available to the plants, whereas some of your synthetic fertilizers are not readily available. They've got to make a chemical change in the soil, and then they become ready and they're taken up by the plant. So I'd like to put the legumes in there, fixes nitrogen, weed suppression, erosion control, and you can have summer annuals, or you can do the fall. Most of your fall crops are annuals anyway. Your wheat is going to start to die back in the spring, and then that's when you just roll it down or cut it, mow it, but you got to leave the debris. You can't just spray it with a chemical to kill it and let it break down, because you're losing all the good properties when you do that. And so the best way, really, in a perfect world, would be to use a crimper roller, is what they call it, a crimper roller. And it's a thing that hooks to the back of a tractor, and it literally looks like something that you would crimp your hair with. Okay, remember when we used to do little crimpy things on our hair? Okay, it looks like that, except for it's round, and it's heavy, and you roll it over the crop, and that lays it down. And then you could do a strip till, and then that's where you plant your desirable crop within that strip. And then you've got another strip that is cover crop. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got a strip of cover crop material, desired plant. Then you got your row in between. It's going to be cover crop. Then have another little row of your plant that you want. Okay.
But your cover crop is really dying because
Right.
of the heat.
Right, it's going to die. It's going to die, and
But it helps control heat.
right. So as these cool season cover crops get through the heat, yes, they're going to start dying back, and you've got your natural hay, your natural straw that you just leave lay there. Okay, or you can pull it up, whichever you want. The legumes, they do break down a little bit faster than the grasses. Grasses have a lot of carbon in them. They say less organic matter addition, shorter time in the weed suppression than grasses. Let's see, mixing a legume with a grass lowers the concerns about nitrogen tie-up after incorporation. And let me see, let's make sure I'm not missing anything in my notes here. So much of the biomass from this is produced in the spring. They will come up in the fall, and we're getting very close to our last planting date for your fall cover crops. You want to get them out before October 15th, if possible. November 1st would be about your latest. So we're right on the edge, and it depends on what Mother Nature sends us. I think it was last year that I planted right around October 10th, and I think we got a freeze like 2 weeks later. And so my cover crop was too small. I needed to have planted it back at the first. Yeah. 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 So you just never know anymore because our seasons are changing so much when that first freeze is going to come. Because I've seen it freeze, by the first Friday in October. And then I've seen it not freeze until November or December around here. So you never know. So earlier the better if you're planning on putting your cover crop out. If you can get your garden cleaned up, just go ahead and plant it, into September into October. So buckwheat is a very popular one. It's a summer crop. It would be a warm season crop. And the bees and the other pollinators love it. And so in my gardens, I do incorporate the buckwheat with everything. My little garden that I have at my house now, it's a little bitty garden, and I kind of terraced it a little bit. I inherited it. I knew no grass was going to grow. So as soon as it got warm enough, I started throwing out grass seed and just flower seeds and my buckwheat seed. So right now, even though all my other flowers are starting to kind of wane, and turn brown and ugly, I've still got buckwheat flowering and going to seed. And so as it continues to go to seed, I just go through and I pick the little seeds off of it and I sprinkle it out in the little bare areas. And so until the first frost, that buckwheat's going to keep growing. And the bees are out there every morning feeding on that buckwheat. So it only gets, a foot, 18 inches tall, a little white flower, just really pretty. You could just incorporate it in with your landscape. And it's also one of the few cover crops that will put phosphorus back into your soil. So it naturally adds phosphorus, but you've got to work it in. You've got to lightly till it in or dig it in. So depending on how big your garden is, I like to do a lot of just double digging. As I said earlier, once the tiller has done its job, I want it out. And as I age, this may change, but I like to do the double digging. I'll get down until I hit that subsoil where the color starts to change in the soil, and I'll just turn that over and I'll just go down the rows and just keep turning that over and then go back and plant and kind of rough up that soil and then pull the cover crop around it for the weed control. I don't know if this is making sense. I'm seeing confused faces. Very interesting. Okay. Okay. But the buckwheat, it's good, quick cover. The house that I did have, we moved in the middle of July, and of course the developers had just finished, and we were having rain in the middle of July, of course. And, I knew I wasn't going to get any fescue to establish. And so I just got bags of buckwheat seed and I planted it all around the house. And it was coming up and it was beautiful to me. And the insurance people come out there and they're like, you need to cut all that down and plant grass. And I told them it's July. I said, I'm not cutting this down and planting grass. I said, this is planted for erosion control. And so they didn't know quite who they were dealing with. So so we had a long talk and I sent them to NRCS and I got to keep my buckwheat. So in the fall, when it got time, then we planted grass, but I told them, no, I'm not cutting that down because it's the only thing that's going to hold the soil in place. So, but that was an interesting experiment.
So does it come up fast?
It comes up fast within a couple of days. Man, that stuff is up. You put it out before rain, give it, 3 to 5 days, and usually it's coming up.
Okay, so for my raised bed gardens,
Mhm.
I go out right now and I plant, I got some crimson clover
Mhm.
put out. And then when it comes up, then the frost is going to, eventually it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to come up, it's going to,
Well, most of it, like the crimson clover, it will last all winter until, it may get killed back if we get some really harsh temperatures, but then it's going to come back as soon as it starts to warm up. And then you're going to get those pretty red flowers in the spring. So that's, yeah. So,
that's all. I didn't know.
yeah, some of them get pretty tall. Some of them get pretty tall.
Okay, and then so then I don't till it under, what do I do with it after?
Well, I have a hard time tilling it under because it's so pretty. Then I plant other things around it. And then as it starts to wane and it starts to go to seed, I gather the seed from it and I save it till the fall of the next year. And then I just bury it. I just bury it and then I plant whatever I'm going to plant. So and let it break down, turn it over, turn the whole thing over under. Yep. 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 Okay. Okay. So your brassicas, mustards, radish, very good crops. Again, get them out early, probably about the end of August, going into September, you want to get those out. And whether you eat them or not, they're going to be there throughout the winter for erosion control. So mustards have a natural pre-emergent weed control factor. If you think about it, a lot of the farmers, when you could no longer fumigate the fields, okay, we used to have a product out that was really bad that you fumigated the fields with, like strawberries, vegetables, such like that. You can't use that anymore. So one of the things they came up was mustards. Mustard makes mustard gas. Okay, so they have a product out there that you can fumigate your fields, and you actually have to till it up. Like if you were doing a plasticulture system, like in strawberries, you put this mustard compound down and you cover it with plastic immediately. And then those fumes fumigate everything that's under that plastic and keeps those weeds from growing. Okay, but it has to be covered. So that's why you see on plasticulture, you'll see there's usually not very many weeds within the row. That's where you want your strawberries, but in between the weeds will still come up because you can't really fumigate those areas. Okay, unless you're going to cover the whole thing. But this, I probably ought to put it on pause, but I had a farmer one time and he was using the mustards, the material, and he brought in a soil sample in a bag. And I wasn't in the office for a couple days. And I come in and there's this plastic gallon bag that's like this, and it's got soil in it. And I'm like, what's on my desk? And I called the farmer and I said, what's on my desk? He said, well, I wanted you to test that soil. It's some that I made up myself. I said, what's in it? Because it was trying to explode. And he said, well, it probably did have a little bit of that mustard stuff that's supposed to keep the weeds from coming up. And I said, would you come get this? We took it outside and we threw it, actually, is what happened. And I said, I'm not opening that thing in the office because I really don't want to blow up. And so we took it out. I took Rusty and we took it outside and we tossed it, and nothing really happened. But if I would have opened that, I could have gassed myself. So it was kind of funny, but it wasn't. So you never know what I'm going to get left on my desk. So, okay. But anyway, your mushrooms, your radishes, they have some natural weed control properties. So they're good to incorporate into your soil.
Are they talking about mustard gas, like the neurogenic, like?
That will kill you. Yes. The stuff that will kill you. You've got to have a full suit, mask, everything if you're applying it to your fields. I'll tell you his name later when I'm not being recorded. But your organic matter, when you put the radishes, like your daikon radishes or the white icicle radishes, they go deep down into the soil and they will just, like I said, you can pick them and eat them, or you can just leave them, let them go big. But they decompose down in the soil, and you can actually look and see where they've made a hole and they've aerated the soil. And then you can just kind of double dig, cover them up. Stinks like crazy when they go to rot. Yes. And I usually put my gardens right outside my front door. And so you can always tell when stuff's breaking down, it's like, it smells like rotten broccoli or something like that. And I was like, oh, well, the greens are just, time to turn them over. So, but they will have a little smell to them, but keeps the salesman away. Yeah. I didn't have very many rodents in my garden either, so maybe that might be repelling the rabbits and things too. So, but just the fact that they are a root crop, they just help to break up that soil, and then they just kind of dissolve, and you've got good organic matter there. But it builds up those biological communities. It adds some nutrients. It helps with the water holding capacity. And it's not just for vegetable gardens. Think site preparation. And the way that I used them, you know, it was a new house, even though I had them scrape the soil off and put it in a pile, which sat there and grew weeds until the house was ready. So it really didn't help that I moved the soil over there. They just moved it back. And, you know, so tried to do the best practice as I could on building my own house, but found out that it didn't work. You know, you could talk all day about something, but when you practice it, you see how it really works. And so we had, you know, where I was going to plant permanent landscape plants, I was doing the cover crops, doing annual plants, putting organic matter on there, digging it in. Then after about 3 years, we started putting in the permanent shrubs around the landscape, because you start talking shrubs and trees, you're talking money. And so if your soil is not correct, then all those expensive plants are just going to die. It's, you know, digging a 50-cent hole for a $200 tree, you know, so you've got to work up that whole bed area. It's just like Catherine was talking last week, if you remember the pictures that she was showing, the bed preparation. And so if you're going to be planting a number of trees or a number of shrubs, if you can, just prepare that whole area. Instead of just one plant, you know, create a larger landscape bed and add organic matter to the whole area, and it will grow better. So drawbacks, yeah, timing. This time of year, it comes up quick. To me, my vegetables are still producing out in the garden, and so it's kind of hard to get out there and plant the cover crop. So you've got to kind of sacrifice some things early on in order to get those seeds out so they can get established and grow through the winter. So you may have to pull some of your tomato plants, you know, they're mostly done by this time of the year anyway. So, you know, just start a good garden cleanup a little bit early. You can plant in between the rows and then go back and maybe scatter in between after you've pulled your plants. Different ways of handling that problem. And it depends on how big of an area you're dealing with. You know, I mean, I take my garden apart a little bit at a time, you know, and, but if you're just going to pull all your tomatoes and all your peppers at once, just clear it out, till it up, plant your cover crop. On a larger scale, equipment can be hard to find. The crimper roller machines are very expensive. And also traditional farmers don't always see the economic value of planting a crop that they're not going to see instant money back from. So when I suggest planting a cover crop, they're like, well, that's costing me money. Well, if you look at it in the future, that crop or that cover crop is going to make you money because you're going to have a better crop that you're going to sell. So your money maker is going to be a better crop. So if you invest a little bit in the cover crop, you'll make more money in the long run because you're protecting the soil, building up that soil structure. Okay. And then rotation, especially in vegetables, you've still got to watch, you know, if you're going to be growing broccoli in a certain field, you don't want to plant your mustards and your greens there because they're all in the same family. So you have to think about your rotations too, especially if you're on a large scale. I'm thinking more of like a farmer that's doing a CSA, you know, they have blocks of kale, blocks of broccoli, you know, they're going to have to rotate those like where their corn was growing or where beans were growing. You have to keep all that rotated and try not to plant the same family over and over again. And so you can leave those fields fallow and just plant a cover crop in between and things like that. So it's just different ways to manage your soil over time. It's not something that happens just overnight or you do it one time and it's going to solve your problem. It's something that you have to keep up with year after year as you plant. So I found in the notes here, it says that it can be slower to get a garden growing in the spring, but I have found out that I can get into my garden earlier because of that cover crop, even if I have to roll it down, you know, because it's there. And if we have excess rain and I still get a sunny day, you go out into that part where the cover crop is growing. Well, it's absorbing that water So it may be a little bit drier out in that area. So you can flatten that out and start doing your strip till and go ahead and start planting within that cover crop too. So you can get an early start. So, but some can be, they can be difficult to roll down. I tell you, I used, like 55 gallon drums full of water. That's something good, because you can just roll it back and forth. You don't have to pick it up. You can just, fill it up with water, and then you roll it down to row those cover crops down, and then you have to row in between. It's one way to do it at home. You can use a heavy log, if you cut down a tree or something and just roll it so that you're not lifting. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to skin a cat. So organic matter, manures. You have to be very careful about where you're getting your, especially fresh manure from, because if the fields that the cattle or the horses are eating the hay off of, if they've been treated with herbicides, then those herbicides are going in your garden. And so most farmers will be using some type of chemicals, of course, to control the weeds. They don't want broadleaf weeds, especially in their gardens. And so the animals eat those, and the herbicides do not break down in their systems. And so then you get their manure, you put it in your garden, and maybe your tomatoes are not growing, or whatever plant you've got is like looking yellow and spindly. And so it might actually go back to the compost or the manure that you added in there. So if you can find organic manure, or just buy the bag stuff, I've gone to where I've been recommending just buying the bag stuff, because it's well composted. And if you can get the organic, it's even better. But if you have an organic source of, somebody that's doing organic livestock, you can get your manures from there. So there are food safety risks. We don't want to use fresh manure teas on vegetables that you're going to harvest within a couple of weeks or within 30 days. That's why it's best to put your manures on in the fall, till that in, let it break down, and then plant in the springtime. A lot of people make compost tea, and that's fine. You take compost, or you take manure, you put it in a bucket, and you let it rot for a few days. Now, if you're not putting that, dumping it over the top of the plant, you're okay. But you've got to be careful if you're side dressing or something like that. Any of that splatters up on the fruit can have E. coli in it, which is going to make you sick. And so that's why one of the main reasons we don't recommend the fresh manure. It needs to be composted 90 to 120 days before putting it into your garden. And leafy greens, definitely don't put it on leafy greens, because they're right there on the ground. It's constantly splashing up. E. coli, salmonella, things like that. They live naturally in the soil. They just need a host. They're just waiting for a host so they can splash up on. And then if you don't clean your vegetables good before you eat them, then you ingest that and then you get sick. So, just don't put the raw manure on there. Then was the composting hot enough? Was it hot enough to break down the weed seeds? I was always told, I think we heard one of the previous ones that said 120 degrees. I always heard 180 degrees, that the compost pile needed to get up to 180 degrees over a certain amount of time to kill weed seeds and other bad bacteria and such like that. So I'm sticking with 180. It's stuck in my head. Composition, salts or herbicides, basically. If the farmer has put herbicides on their fields, they've put salts. So you're going to have a lot of salts built up in those manures and in that compost. Immobilization, that goes with your carbon nitrogen ratio. If there's a lot of straw in it, it's not going to break down as fast. So you may want it to not break down as fast. So for food crops, non-manure compost may be the best. For smaller gardens, I like to keep a little container under the sink with a lid on it. And, anytime I have peelings and stuff like that, that all goes into the bucket. And then I'll just go out to the garden and I'll dig a little trench, like especially next to corn. I like doing this when corn gets about a foot tall. And I'll just dig a little trench and I'll dump that compost mix down in there and I'll cover it with soil. And it adds water and it adds nutrients. I guess it was the lady at our meeting that was talking about doing that to her trees. Yeah, Katie was talking about doing that to her trees. That's what I do to my garden, basically. It's like composting on the go is what I always called it. So I just put it out there and let it break down. And I've never had problems with animals getting in there because it's covered up. And so,
It sound like she covered it up though.
yeah,
Just scraped.
yeah, hers was just scraped. I dig a little tunnel, little hole or a little trench and cover it up. Mhm. And that way you're not attracting.
Did you hear her say that she covered it?
I think I
Did she?
Like,
Okay,
scraped it off and covered it.
you covered that up.
Otherwise, it's horrible.
Yeah. So, okay. So, the compost, I mean, if you need compost in big portions, there's the compost company out on Highway 12. Let somebody else do it for you. Or you can compost yourself. If you have a lot of materials, maybe you have a large garden, maybe you have a landscape business where you're picking up grass clippings and leaves and things like that. You can compost, make your own compost bins yourself. The only thing I worry about is those lawn clippings, the leaves, is the herbicides. All the herbicides that are used on the lawns. Put that into your compost pile, that's going to stay. It just does not break down. Or most of them do not break down. It takes a long time. And that's the way the chemical companies make them. So they have a long residual and they work a long time. So it's kind of hard. The more chemicals are used, the harder it is to find good compost. But it does need to get up to a high rate and you have to turn it. With our temperatures, the composted material will break down very, very fast during the hot months.
What's the name of this compost company?
That's just what they're called, the compost company.
Where is it?
Let's see, you go probably about 5-8 miles down Highway 12, like you're going to Ashland City, you'll see it on the right. If you have your windows open, you'll smell it before you get there. It doesn't smell bad to me. It just smelled like mulch. But
Is it,
I think the neighbors around there didn't like it at first.
is it bulk or is it in bag?
It's bulk. I think you can buy it both, actually. I think when they first started, I think it was just in bulk and you had to come out there and they'd load up your pickup truck. So, but they have an organic and they have a non-organic mix out there. So, but there are other companies around. I cannot recommend one over the other. I better preface it with that. There are other places where you can get compost. Mushroom compost is good. You're not going to have any chemicals in that for sure. Cottonseed hulls, different things like that, may not have as much herbicides in there. So, but other soil conditioners that you might want to use, peat moss. Of course, we get that from the northern states, Michigan, such like that. The soil is not going to break down as fast because it's colder up there. I mean, they get a summer, they get heat, but they have a longer winter period than they do summer. So they have a lot of peat in their soil. They have a deep, thick soil. So that's where our peat would come from that you buy in the bales or the bags. So you can add peat, you can add perlite, vermiculite, sand. I'm going to put a question mark by. Because if you have a really clay soil and you add a bunch of sand, you know what you're going to get? Bricks. Okay. So I would rather see, the organic matter put in there over sand because we have a sandy clay soil. So there's usually enough sand in there for it to be well drained enough, but the organic matter is going to help build up that soil structures in the long run. So drainage, you see a lot of this. I mean, some fields are just poorly drained. The farmers that raise corn, soybeans, whatever here in the bottomlands, I guess they just kind of write it in that they're going to lose part of their crop because they know it's going to flood. So just depends on how long that water stands as to whether that corn would recover from that or not. If that drains within 24, 48 hours, that area of corn is probably going to pop back up and be fine. If it's stays there over about 48 hours, as you know, it's going to start to rot and kill it. So this may be an area where drainage tiles or something like that would be needed on a larger scale. And we'll look at those in just a minute. Okay, so it looks like, oh, okay, this is just a garden. Looks like they've added some straw, newspaper. This is one of the things that I like to do in a small garden is after I get it all planted, get it weeded good, and then put down a layer of newspaper, cardboard. Newspaper's fine as long as you don't use the slick papers like magazine, because that has a different type of ink in it. But you can use those, put in between your rows, in between your plants, and then put straw or some type of mulch on top of that. And it helps you control your weeds throughout the growing season. So it takes a little work on the front end. And I'm one that I don't really care for landscape barrier fabric, because that's just something that when it comes up, it has to go in the landfill. But your cardboard, your newspaper and things like that, they break down. And so when you till up this garden at the end of the season, you're just adding organic matter. It just turns into organic matter that you're putting into the soil. So I think that's what that was representing. Okay, this is kind of old timey. This would be traditional agriculture, and they're trenching, they're ripping and trenching and literally putting bricks, piles, and that is helping to drain those areas. And I mean, that is still a very common practice in agriculture for fields that flood
All of northern
constantly.
Indiana and northwestern Ohio have that. If you
Mhm.
buy land, you actually have to maintain it. You're
Okay,
responsible for it.
okay, okay.
It used to be a huge swamp.
Yeah,
It used to be a swamp that drained.
so they can drain the swamp, put that in there, but then you're responsible for it. Okay. Okay. Looks like that would be a difficult process. But the tiles, the drainage ditches, you know, they just help that surface drainage. They help it to divert the water, slow it down, saturate the soil, and keep it from running off. And used to lower a high water table. I don't know exactly how that works, but the water in the pores in a finely textured soil are not likely to be impacted from the addition of the tiles. So erosion is soil loss. Most of our soil is now down in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere, you know, because all along the Mississippi River from north to south, it floods and all that good soil goes into the river, and it eventually dumps out into the ocean, which they consider it a pollutant down there. And if you look at our rivers and streams, after it's rained, you'll see the mud, the sediment. That's one of the biggest pollutants that we have, at least in Tennessee, is just runoff. It's soil, it's dirt, it's things like that. And it can be caused from poor construction practices. Maybe they don't have erosion fencing up, or they don't have it put up correctly. They're not protecting the creeks and the waterways near where they're developing the houses and things like that. So sometime, I don't know if you've lived here years, you'll know what I mean. You know, go to Rotary Park or go to Billy Dunlop Park and look at the waterways and how they flow, and whether it's clear or whether it's muddy. You know, just kind of look at those things. McAdoo Creek, as development increases, your sediment in our creeks and streams and our, you know, used to be play areas are now muddy water. You know, it's losing water because they're changing the flow of the land, and so that changes the flow of the water. And so I know the creek at Rotary is just practically dry, and it's due to a lot of the development around it. Because I remember 20 years ago when my kids were little, we'd go down the creek stomping, and you go knee high, you know, in some places a little bit deeper. You don't find that now. Not there anyway. So preventing erosion, cover your soil. And that's what we were talking about with the cover crops, or your desired crop. Close spacing, you know, just using mulch, using plants. Just make sure that the sun is not reaching that soil surface, and trying not to till up or try not to till too deeply, because there's always going to be a seed bed of dormant seeds. And so when you go to digging, you bring them to the sunlight, you bring them up, they're going to come to life. And so that's why we look at minimum till, just barely tapping the top of the ground. So, but you do want to keep that soil covered so that the light doesn't get to the weed seeds. You can also look at your slope. If you can reduce your slope, if you're having a lot of erosion problems, you may have to plant a slope with native grasses and wildflowers and just not mow it, just mow it once or twice a year. It may not look pristine, like a formal landscape, but it will be doing the job that it's supposed to be doing. It will be holding the soil. And to me, it looks pretty, just using a mix of native grasses and some wildflowers and just kind of letting it go wild. It looks fine. Some people don't like that look. They want it mowed. They want it crew cut mowed. But you're always going to have problems with erosion if you keep your grass cut that close. And, but it's up to the individual what they want to do. So tillage, to till or not, that's one of the biggest questions. I know you have to till a little bit, but I'm talking minimum. And if you can't get away from tillage, maybe you need to go to raised beds. I guess it really, one of the things that impacts this is how large of a garden you have, or are you growing as a commercial vegetable producer? How big of an area are you having to till? And if you can do minimum till, please do that. So not one solution is going to fit all sites. Everything is different, but it is important to have a thorough knowledge of that site. Maybe go to the USDA web soil survey and look at what your parent soil is, get a little bit more information on the texture, the characteristics, the drainage properties. These are things you can all look up. Like if you're looking to buy a piece of property and you want to farm, you can pull this up on the web soil survey, and you make a little map and it tells you all the different little soil types that you've got, and you can print them out, and then you can kind of start deciding where you want to grow what. So if you have a naturally wet area, maybe you're going to plant sycamore and birch and things that like wet areas. If you have an extremely dry area, then you're going to pick plants that like extremely dry areas. So that web soil survey is just another management tool that we can use. So tillage does help to incorporate organic matter, does help to control the weeds. It aerates, and I think it compacts. I'm going to disagree with that with my own people here. I think it causes compaction. It does do some aeration, but it breaks down those particles really fine, and then you get compaction. It can increase the warming if you can get out there early enough in the spring, before the spring rains. You can make raised beds in the soil and they'll warm up faster, and you can plant earlier. It makes a fine seed bed because you can till it and then rake it out real smooth, and you have a nice area to work with. It quickens the organic matter breakdown. So if you've planted your cover crop in the fall and you're ready to plant in the spring, and we're having a good dry period, like in February, you might want to get out there and just go ahead and bush hog down and till up that cover crop at that point. And then you'll be able to get out to your garden a little bit earlier. Okay. Tillage can bring up the weed seeds. It breaks up your soil aggregates, and it does reduce that pore space and can cause compaction. All right. So it all comes back to the soil structure, those little cubes that we were talking about in the first couple pictures. So a lower bulk density is lower weight, has more pore space. The water is going to move easier through those pores. If you have a higher bulk density on your soil, it's going to be heavier, like your clay, and it's going to have less pore space. And so the water is not going to move through those pores as easily. And so that would be a soil where you would need to add some organic matter. So, okay. We've gone about an hour and a half. Do you guys need a break? Want to take a 10-minute? Okay. All right, let's take a 10-minute break. For y'all online, see if we've got any questions. I got some hands up here. So.
I had a question, Carla.
Okay, go ahead.
We just moved into a suburban tract house. And we
Okay.
have wonderful compacted clay soil.
Compacted clay soil. Okay.
One's not very healthy. Can I put a cover crop like red clover on top of that grass? Would that help?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. Like I said, it's not very conventional looking. But when, you know,
Well,
I
the weeds
agree.
don't look too good either, so.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, but by using the cover crops, you know, that would help you be ready to plant grass in the spring, which is not the best time to plant grass, but at least it would be something to hold it over. But you could plant the crimson clover. I would suggest probably putting some rye in there with it too.
Now, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Now. Mhm. Okay. One of the comments is, what's the best way to spread the clover seed over your yard? You can buy equipment, you know, normally a seed spreader, and it's a little bag and it's got a wheel on it, and you usually has a dial, and you set it to however many pounds per square feet is recommended for seeding. Like fescue, it's usually 8 pounds per 1,000 square foot. So I like to have a seeder with me so I can set the dial, and then it all depends on your walking speed and things like that. But you're walking and you're turning the little dial and you're putting your seeds down. Either that or act like you're feeding the chickens. I tend to spread it, yeah, just go along and like you're feeding the chickens.
You
So
tend to overuse the seed when you do that. though.
yeah,
So
yeah,
what I found is I'll mix it with something else, like I'll mix it with some lime or something.
okay.
You know,
Yeah.
that way you don't use up all your seed and, you know.
That's true. That's true. He was
Or you
saying,
mix it with sand.
yeah, mix it with sand or something like that, compost, when you're throwing your seeds down. So, Amanda, if you think your soil has lead in it, I meant to mention this earlier, and if you think your soil has, you know, some type of chemical, pesticide, lead, anything in it, there are private labs where you can go get that tested. And we usually recommend, like, if somebody wants to start a community garden in town where there's been houses, or maybe where it's near, especially like where a gas station has been, or maybe an industry, I would definitely send that to an outside lab for testing, and then they can tell you how to alleviate that problem. So, but yeah, our lab does not test for the heavy metals. Actually, yes, they do. I'm sorry. They do test for heavy metals now. Since the hemp program came along, I'm sorry, I forgot, within the last year. So you can send it to our UT lab for heavy metals test. Okay. Clover seeds, I think I answered that question. Just put it in with your grass seed spreader. Raised beds, do I need to have a real natural soil mixed into my bags of dirt? Seems we had a class before that said I do. I like to put some natural good soil in with the compost in a raised bed. I think it helps it add more nutrients, and it gives it a better water holding capacity. Recommendation on a place to purchase clover seed. There's a lot of places around town. Like I said, I can't recommend one over the other, but you know, we've got Rural King, we've got Co-op, we've got Tractor Supply. And if you can't find the mixes that I'm recommending or NRCS is recommending, you can go online, Gurney's, Johnny's Seed. They all offer different mixes of cover crops. So you might end up having to Google it to get exactly what you want, especially at a homeowner size. Because I tried to go to our co-op and, I just wanted a 5-pound bag and they're like, no, we're not gonna do that.
You can buy any quantity.
Yeah. Yeah, you can buy the little bags of crimson clover, but I wanted a mix. They won't mix it specially. Yeah. So he went and got me some scrapings and then I added like seeds that I had at home. I got the crimson clover seed. I added it to it. I followed my little recipe as closely as possible and spread it out. So, okay. My daughter just got a blood level lab result today, and she's always trying to eat soil and wood. Is that different than a normal soil test? I don't understand what you're asking. You may have to explain. Amanda? Yes, our lab tests soil for heavy metal. I'm not going to get into the doctor area. Heavy metals. Okay. No, that's not part of a regular soil test. Okay, I see what you're asking now. No, the test for heavy metals is a separate test than your soil test just for nutrients. Okay, I think I finally got what you were asking. Okay. All right, I'm going to step away for just a minute and I'll be right back. Okay, well, I think we're ready to get started again here. All right, so we're back to talking about the soil structure, and we talked about the bulk density, so we'll move on to the next one. Promise not to keep you here till 9:30 tonight. Okay, so assessing our soil. I think it's very important to get a representative soil sample. When you are testing your soil, you can't just pull it all from one place. So if you have, just a regular landscape, or if you're farming, they want you to have 10 acres or less per soil sample. So let's say, you have an acre of land. That's what you want to test. If everything is pretty similar, the soil seems the same, you don't have any problem areas. What you're going to do on that 1 acre is you're going to go out and you're going to gather, you're going to get a bucket and a shovel, and you're going to go out and you're going to dig down 6 to 8 inches, put a little sampling of soil in your bucket, go on to another area, do the same thing until you've gone all through the field, along the sides, and gathered several small samples, put them in that bucket, mix them together really well. And then we need about 1.5 cups worth to send off to the lab now. So you do want to try to pull out any grass or debris, root clipping, things like that. And make sure it's dry, because the people at the lab like dry soil. They don't like wet soil. So if you bring it to us and it's wet, it'll sit here until it dries, and then that may delay your soil sample results getting back to you.
Carla, can you let it dry in the bucket, or is it better to wait till the ground is really fairly
Um,
dry to get a better representation?
If you spread it out, it'll dry a little bit quicker, because in a bucket that, you'll have to continue to mix it and make it dry, because the bottom part will stay wet, and then, just turn it. Or, you could turn it in the bucket, or you could put it out on a piece of newspaper or something. Straight it.
Hard to find any dry soil.
Yeah, right now it is hard to find dry soil.
Must have been the wettest September we ever had.
I know, but it'd be a good,
October,
Yep.
October's usually the driest month of the year.
but it'd be a good year for planting trees. So just keep that in mind. If you've been waiting to plant trees or woody landscape plants, now that we've got the damp weather, this is a good time to plant. Don't wait until spring, because you want to let those plants get established before they have to go through a summer here. But this picture here gives a good example. You're just going to pick a place to start. And like I said, make sure you're taking those samples from at least a 6-inch depth. Now, I'm probably going to confuse you all, and we'll talk about this again when we have our fruit production class. Now, these directions here are just for lawn, garden, basic fields, pasture, or such like that. Now, if you're growing a crop like an orchard or blueberries especially, you want to take 2 samples. You're going to take a sample at the 6 to 8 inch depth, and you're going to send it off. That's one sample. That's sample 1, blueberries. Then you're going to dig down about 14 inches and fill out several areas. You're digging down 14 inches and gathering your soil samples from a 14-inch depth, and then send that in so that you can see what your pH is lower down in the soil, because the pH at 14 inches may be okay. All right. And so it's going to last longer. You're going to be able to, this is hard to explain, all this chemistry stuff, but that top 6 inches is good. You're going to fertilize that. You're going to add, like if you're growing blueberries, you're going to add sulfur and such like that. And if you know that the ground below is naturally acid, then that chemical reaction is going to happen quicker, and it's going to remain acid longer. But if you have an alkaline soil at a 14-inch depth, then you have an alkaline soil at a 6-inch depth, and you're trying to grow blueberries, you're really going to have to add a lot of sulfur at a 14-inch depth and at a 6-inch depth, if that makes sense. And that's, like I said, in a perfect world to establish an orchard, because that's a permanent crop. That would be your fruit trees, your nut trees, grapes, anything that you would be growing, on a high production level. Now for a homeowner, if you're just going to plant one row of blueberries, yeah, I would still say try to get down to at least 8 to 12 inches. If you just got 6 blueberry plants and you're wanting to amend a strip, try to get down to close to 14 inches as you can and just send off one sample. But if you're planning on going into commercial production and having that orchard for 25 years, then you're going to want to amend that subsoil as well as the upper layers of the soil. Okay. So it's a little bit different for different crops on how we sample and how we amend the soils. But just for your basic homeowners, this picture here, you just kind of do the stagger method, go around. We need about 2 cups worth of soil. And the soil probes, I don't like to try to use those things in Tennessee because you can't get the soil back out. I should have grabbed ours, but it's just a tube. And a lot of times it will have like little levers on the side where you can push it down with your foot. Because the soil is hard as a rock around here. So it's easier to use a shovel. But if you really want to see the layers of your soil, you can use a soil probe, get that down in there, twist it, dig it around, you can pull it out and you can look and you can see your layers of soil and all that stuff. And you have to get a stick or a screwdriver or something and jam it out and get it into your bucket. So, but there's different types of probes. Some of the more expensive ones will have one that actually has a little tool on it that you pull back and you push the soil out. It pushes the soil for you. But those things get stopped up real easy. It's kind of like tulip planters. If you ever try to use a tulip planter to actually plant tulips, they just get all jammed up in those little things. So then you hit rocks. And so a spade is my favorite tool. It's narrow, it's lightweight, and it goes where I want it to go. Not like a wide shovel that tends to twist. I just like using a spade myself. So, but just any regular tools, you don't need really special tools. It's just getting a representative sample and getting dry soil and about 2.5 cups worth. So we do have the soil boxes here and the forms, but you can also go online. Let's see if it gives that one. Okay. But yeah, we have the soil boxes here. You can always pick them up and the forms, but you can also do it online. It's just Soil Plant and Pest Center, UT Soil Plant and Pest Center. I would just Google that. I will send you an email with the link on it. But you can go to that site now. You can download the form, fill it out, print it out. You can pay your $15 online, put your soil, dry soil in a Ziploc bag and put it in a box or a very sturdy container envelope and send it off to the post office. It takes about $5 to mail it off. So if you bring your soil in here, the soil sample is $15 and we charge $5 for shipping. So, but we do have the boxes and everything that's available. So okay. Important pieces of information. Your pH is one of the most important things that you're going to get out of your soil test. And you have to know what you're going to plant and what pH that plant requires. Because, like I said, blueberries and apples are going to be very different. Apple orchard is going to like an alkaline soil. It can survive on a very poor, low nutrient quality soil. Whereas your blueberries are going to be a little bit pickier. They want that acid soil. They like a lot of organic matter. They have a shallow root system. And so you got to look up the different cultural requirements of each plant to know what pH range it needs to be in. So, okay. And then it's going to tell you on that soil report what you need to add to change that pH to match the plant that you're going to be planting. Okay. So when you look at that form, you're going to give your sample a name. You'll just give it an ID. And some people will do like the front yard, the backyard, side yard, and so you'll just mark it however you can remember it. And when you get your soil test results back, it's going to give you a kind of a level of expectation. Like on a lawn, it will say just average maintenance, high maintenance, medium. And so you pick one, okay? If you want golf course quality, that would be your highest maintenance level. And you're gonna follow those recommendations from there. If you're just happy with something green out there, you can follow those lower maintenance recommendations. And there's less fertilizer inputs and such like that. So it depends on what your expectations are also. But we're going to show the water, the buffer value, the water pH. The buffer value just tells you how much lime you're going to need to change that pH. It's hard to explain. Yeah, when a lime recommendation is indicated. So, and then your water pH indicates the acidity of your soil. Most plants are going to grow best at 6.0 to 6.5, with exclusions of blueberries, azaleas, and acid-loving crops. And then you'll also get your phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, the zinc, copper, all of that is covered in the basic test now. And so you're going to be given a value there. And then on the next page, you will have the recommendations. And so a lot of our soils are naturally alkaline. And I think my reasoning behind that, from what I've noticed over the years, is that we're building houses in old soybean fields. Okay, soybeans like to be limed intensively. Okay, so you don't always need lime automatically. Okay, it may be there. I mean, they may have been adding it for years and years and years. So you got to build up there that you don't need, and you don't know until you soil test. So just dumping lime, 40-pound bag of lime on every year just because dad did it, grandpa did it, mama did it, whatever, you have to get away from that habit and go ahead and soil test and see if you actually need that lime or not, because you could be messing up all your plants by putting on too much lime or not enough. Okay, so that's what your soil test is going to tell you. So, but yeah, you'll look on here, like your code was for a vegetable garden. It's going to say broadcast 25 pounds of 6-12-12 per 1,000 square foot before planting. So you do just what it says. You get a 25-pound bag of 6-12-12, and you spread that evenly over your 1,000 square foot area. Okay. You would actually have to, 25 pounds over 1,000 square foot area. And then if you had a larger area like that, you would just keep adding, doubling it, to fit your area. So, this is more on a farmer scale. You can get people at the co-op and other places. You can hire them if you have large fields that you need limed. You can hire them to come in and lime. Let's see. So you also want to watch the forms. We have 2 forms now. We have a field crop form, and then we have the home and garden form. So your home and garden form is going to give you recommendations in 1,000 square feet or 100 yards lower areas. If you send in the field soil test form, it's going to give you recommendations in acres. And then you're going to make your extension agent have to work and go through all these calculations and bring it back down to per 1,000 acre. Or we can cheat. There's little calculators online that you can plug your numbers in and say, oh, okay. So you want to try to, when you're filling out those forms, making sure you're filling out for the homeowner, not for the farmer. Okay. For traditional farms. So a complete fertilizer is going to be one that has nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, N, P, and K. Okay, it is labeled by the law, the percentage that is contained in there. Very little actual fertilizer in those bags. The rest of it is inert ingredients. So you're paying for a lot of nothing really, but they have to mix it with something. So your fertilizers, they can come in pelletized form. They can come in a powder form. You know, the pelletized are easier to apply. It's kind of like pelletized lime is easier than just dry, straight lime. I mean, lime will burn you. It will get in your eyes and it can hurt you. You know, if you get it in your eyes and your mouth and on your hands, it can burn. So the pelletized keeps all that stuff off of your skin and out of your, you know, you're not breathing it in and such. So that's going to be a complete fertilizer, a 10, 10, 10, 13, 13, 13, 6, 12, 12. All those are complete fertilizer because they've got all the major nutrients in it. And they also contain your minor nutrients that we talked about also. The micronutrients like boron, there may be some in the bag. You would have to read the label on the bag. So if you had a field of tomatoes and you get a soil test and it says you're low on boron, then you may have to add borax. You know, you can buy that in the store. You know, borax used for cleaning, used to control ants. It's used for a lot of different things. So so those micronutrients, if you think you have a problem, you may have to test individually for that. But then again, that's what we would tell a farmer with a high value crop. Because most of the time, just in a small garden, you're not really going to notice a boron deficiency in your garden, but you would notice it in a larger field, if that makes sense. So your fertilizers, they can be chemical, they can be organic, and some of them are certified organic. So chemical, basically it's an industrial process. They're mined, they're mixed, they're blended or purified. The salts are going to provide, salts dissolve the potassium nitrates and make that nitrogen and the nitrogen ion, make the potassium and the nitrogen ions available to the plant. It breaks it down, has to go through a process in the soil to break down and be available to the plants. This is where all that chemistry comes in and starts getting confusing. So organic fertilizer, it's just what we talked about, you know, adding compost, manures, the cover crops, the manure crops, things like that, that we're going to add into. Let's see, what's some of the others that I have? Mushroom compost, coconut hulls, things like that would be organic. Now, if they're selling them as organic, they need to have this USDA organic label on the bag. If it just says organic and it doesn't have the little organic seal, it really doesn't mean anything. You might want to look further into the bag, okay, what is really in there, because organic can mean, you know, banana peels, potato peels, you know, things like that. But organic in this sense means that it has no synthetic chemicals used in it. It means it came from a source where there were no chemicals in the manure. You know, you got to go, I guess, go back on it all. So, and it is illegal to sell something, market organic, certified organic, if USDA has not certified it. So you can get in big trouble if you try to bag up your own manure and call it organic and sell it. If one of the inspectors were to come along and catch you, you could get, you know, you get in big trouble. Because there's a process that you go through to become an organic producer. And so, yeah, okay. Let's see, compost, animal byproducts, just naturally mined things are organic. Some of your formulations, this would be how you apply your fertilizers. They can be a granular, and it's probably a blended, you know, have your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other nutrients in it. You can have your water soluble, like your Peters or Miracle-Gro. You just mix them with water and put them on. And then the slow release is usually pelleted, and that is how it's slowly released. The pelleted material breaks down with water. And so if you read on the bag, it will usually tell you with natural rainfall, this product is good for 60 days, or it's good for 90 days, reapply in 60 days, 90 days. So it just depends on what kind of coating is used, how often you would have to fertilize. Okay, does that make sense?
heat, they release fertilizer as it's hot.
I would think that the sun would break it down, but more it's based on the water. Water breaks it down. Because you really want your fertilizers incorporated into the soil. You don't want to just spread them on top of the ground. If you can incorporate it or, put them on and water them in as quick as you can, because they can degrade in the sun, then they wouldn't be any good. Oh no, the math. Okay. All right, so if your soil test says to apply 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, and you have 3,000 square foot garden, and you're using a 10 by 10, 10, 10 fertilizer product, how much fertilizer should be applied?
No. It's only 10%, right?
Lordy, I hope she
You need
gives you the
6
answer.
pounds of nitrogen fertilizer, you're gonna need 60 pounds, I think. Like 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet, or 3,000 square feet, so you need 6 pounds of nitrogen. For fertilizer,
Yep.
a pound per pound, it's only 10% of it is nitrogen.
Exactly.
So you get maybe 60 pounds of fertilizer.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, this is where it gets complicated. So I'm going to read her notes here. Okay, it says one pound of fertilizer product does not equal 1 pound of actual nitrogen, just like what Bob was saying. Have you ever wondered how to determine the amount of fertilizer needed to equal 1 pound of nitrogen? And it's actually just a little bit of arithmetic here. So first, determine the percentage of nitrogen in the fertilizer product. Okay, let's say we're using a 10, 10, 10. So we've got a 10% or 0.1 nitrogen per pound. The fertilizer's contents are always listed in the same order: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So the amount of nitrogen in your fertilizer product is the first number. And this number represents the percentage of nitrogen per pound of fertilizer. So fertilizer with a ratio of 10, 10, 10 contains 10% nitrogen per pound of product. So now to determine how many pounds of fertilizer should be applied per 1,000 square feet, we're going to divide the pounds of nitrogen required. Divide the pounds of nitrogen required per 1,000 square foot by the percentage of nitrogen in your fertilizer product, 0.1. And always express that in a decimal. So for this, we're going to divide 2 pounds by 0.1. So the answer is 20 pounds of fertilizer is required to apply 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot using a 10, 10, 10 fertilizer ratio. Yeah, clear as mud, huh? So if you're doing it over a 3,000 square foot area, yes, you would triple that, and that would be 60 pounds. Yeah. Okay, let's hope we're done with that. This is scary. Yeah, so you would, yeah. It could be. That's why your soil test is important, because your soil test may come back and say, yeah, okay, we're going to make a basic nitrogen recommendation just based on what the crop needs from research. But if your phosphorus is high, it may say 0 on the recommendation. It may say you don't need any phosphorus and you don't need any potassium. There's where your weed and feed things come in, because it may, you never know exactly how much fertilizer you're putting on per 1,000 square foot when you're using a weed and feed product. You don't know if it's going to match that soil test, and you don't know if it matches what you're growing. So that's why I don't care for those products. I'd rather do an individual mix, or just they're separate. Spray your weeds, fertilize your plants. So okay, just some ways of applying. Oh, wait a minute here. Kathy, did you have another question?
No,
Oh, okay. It's in your hand up. Somebody says, do we have to do this math for the test? No. I promise I won't. I used to. I won't put these on there. No. And what about slow release and the effect on birds? It looks like seeds. Try to work it into the soil or water it in so that the birds are not eating it. Usually that coating on there will keep the birds, it'll deter them from eating it, but a little bit of nitrogen is probably not going to hurt them. Just birds are smarter than that. Yeah.
Trying to get some arms.
Yeah, they're going after the worms and the seeds and things like that. So, okay, so incorporating fertilizers or how you apply them, you're going to hear us use terms like broadcast, banding, side dressing. So broadcasting your fertilizer just means you're evenly spreading it out across the area, and then it's generally tilled in to the upper surface of the soil. Banding is when you take fertilizer and you put it about 2 to 4 inches around a new plant and seeds, but it's not touching the roots of the plant, especially a high nitrogen fertilizer. You do not want to put in the hole and close to the seed or close to the root of a plant, because those new little feeder roots will get burnt by the nitrogen, and then they don't want to grow, and they, it kind of slows them down and stunts their growth. So that's why we were saying last week to not add any fertilizer to the hole when you plant a tree, unless you're using a starter fertilizer that has phosphorus and potassium. But you want to stay away from the high nitrogen. And side dressing is generally just what it says. It's like corn needs to be side dressed at 2 different times during the year when it grows. If it gets to about 12 to 18 inches tall, you add some nitrogen and water it really well. And then when it starts to tassel, that's the second time that you side dress the corn plant. So you may have to do it twice. And side dress is just you're digging a little trench along the side of your plants, you're putting your fertilizer in there, and you're covering that back up with soil. So that's all, just what it says. Okay. All right, let's look at some of the components of your soil. And we've gone over a lot of this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is going back like to those little cubes. Your minerals, okay, include sand, silt, and clay. And these are the small rock particles in the soil that contain the various nutrients that your plants need to grow. And, they'll have calcium, they'll have iron, things like that in there. But it's also important to have these pore spaces where air and water fill up the pore spaces. And so under ideal planting conditions, the soil has about equal amounts of air and water. And a dry soil is going to have mostly air in its pores. And while a very wet soil is going to have more water than air in the pores. That's just kind of common sense, that it's saturated, the pores are full. And if it's dry, those pores are empty. And if you have open pockets, like we talked about with the tree planting, that pocket there that's dry could dry out the root system, and the feeder roots can't grow. And then that tree could start dying, from one part to another. So, but you have to think of soil as a living entity. Plant roots are alive. The fungi, the bacteria, the other microorganisms that are in the soil, they're alive. I mean, they're not human like us. We don't think that they can feel and speak, but sometimes a plant will tell you when it's weak. It'll turn yellow. It's not getting enough water. It may grow leggy if it's not getting enough sun. So there are ways that plants kind of speak to us. You prune a tree at the wrong time of the year and it's going to bleed. So I tend to think of plants very close to the human anatomy, especially when I'm explaining how they grow. And we have veins, they have xylem and phloem. Okay, so it's very similar, I think, or in my mind, I have to think about it that way. That a tree is a lot like a human, and in how chemical processes and biological processes work. But as you can see in the picture here, we have our airspace, we have our water, we have a little bit of sand, we have some silt. The fungal hyphae, sometimes we call that mycorrhizae. You'll find mycorrhizae in natural wooded areas. The mycorrhizae will be a part of the roots. And when you see trees that are growing in a forest, their hands, their roots will be all meshed together, and they have a fungi, mycorrhizae, that helps them grow. And these trees will actually, if there's a sick tree in the midst of a grove of trees, the healthy trees will actually send nutrients and send good things to a dying tree to try to help save it. Y'all need to read The Secret Life of Trees. Secret Life of Trees. It's an excellent book, and it gives you a whole new perspective on the whole ecological system and how it works. So, but I'm getting a little philosophical. I can't talk now. Okay, but we have good bacteria in the soil. We have the clay, organic matter complex, all that good stuff. So we have bacteria. It's always in the soil. Some can cause problems and some don't. Sometimes you eat soil and you're going to get sick from it. Depends on what kind of bacteria was in there. You might eat soil and you'd be fine, and it helps build up your immunity. I used to always think that playing in the dirt built up my immunity, and so, but the bacteria, they act as decomposers, mutualist. That's a new word. They can be pathogens, and they can be whatever that last word is. So sorry about that one, but that one was over my head. And I did review this. So there are lots of connections to nitrogen. Nitrogen provides the green growth in your plants. Okay, you want that green leafy growth, and you can let's see. We have the nitrogen fixing bacterias. We have the cover crops, your legumes that release nitrogen naturally, or you can add it yourself through the synthetic chemicals. So the nitrogen is the bacteria is most plentiful in the area close to the roots, the rhizosphere, where it exudes and makes exudates and other materials that are plentiful. If you think back to our first class, Stephen Smith talked about the corn, that corn can grow in a desert because it exudes a certain type of gooey substance that I guess provides water for it. So, so that is a bacteria that is working with the corn to help keep it watered and to grow in that environment. Now, Stephen's probably listening and saying, "Oh, Carla, you just messed it all up." So, but that's the kind of research that he does, that they found out on the corn, that it doesn't need to be irrigated, that we could grow non-irrigated corn if we wanted to use specific varieties, because corn will grow in the desert. That's Peru, places like that. And they finally figured out that it was kind of making its own water, basically. So we'll have to talk to Stephen about that. He's the doctor. But yeah, your bacterias, a lot of your bacterias are good bacterias. They're found in that organic matter. They're common in agriculture systems. You'll see more fungi in the forest areas. And then there is kind of a fungi to bacterial ratio in your soil. I don't know that there's a test for that. I'm sure that somebody could probably put it under a microscope and look and tell you, how much bacteria and how much fungus you have in your soil. Again, that's over my head to go in this deep. But just know that your bacteria, your fungi, your microorganisms, all of those are an important part of your soil composition. Okay, so your fungi tends to be the largest in total biomass. It's more in the woodland environments. They are decomposers, they're mutualist, symbiotic. I don't know what that other word means. And they can be parasitic. Some of your fungi can be parasitic, which means that they're feeding off the plant that they're attached to. an example. Okay. Parasite. Okay, here we go. This is sclerotium. This is southern blight. Okay, if you've ever seen your tomatoes just kind of fall over in the garden, or they start to wilt and they fall over and they've been well watered, and you go do a little bit more investigation and you see all this white mycelium. I thought my pointer was working, but the white mycelium around the base of that plant, that means that that whole plant needs to be pulled, and as much of the soil that you can dig up around it, or that southern blight fungi is going to stay in the soil. And so if you had tomatoes that got affected and you planted peppers the next year, you're likely to get southern blight again because they're in that same family, or potatoes or eggplant. And so this is one of the reasons that we rotate crops, because these have specific hosts. So, okay. This is just the mycorrhizal fungi under the microscope. It's growing in conjunction with the plant cells. That's how the mycorrhiza on those tree roots, they help each other. They can expand the surface area of the roots and enable the uptake of nutrients such as phosphorus. In exchange, they receive the sugars from the plant. So it's a symbiotic relationship rather than a parasitic. They're helping out each other. A parasite would just be like sucking the nitrogen out of a tree, sucking the nutrients out of a tree or a plant or something. Have you heard of a plant named dodder? We call it a parasitic plant because it will attach to a plant itself and it will take the nutrients away from the plant. Okay, it's a yellow weed, and all of a sudden you'll see it and it's all curled up in your plants. But it attaches to the plants and it sucks the nutrients away from the plant itself. So dodder, D-O-D-D-E-R, and it's a parasitic weed. So, arthropods, insects in the soil. We may not like millipedes, especially if they get in our house, or centipedes or things like that. But if you can, just scoop them up and throw them back out in the dirt. They're good. You know, we do have some centipedes that will bite you. And it's just kind of like a wasp sting or a bee, depends on your body system, how you're going to react to it. You might get hurt, you might get a bump, it might swell up and itch. It just depends on your allergic reaction to that insect. So, but the soil contains, you know, spiders, centipedes. We'll have some root feeders in there, herbivores, fungal feeders like the springtails. They're all good as long as they're in the soil. It's kind of like weeds. Once they get out of place, you know, you don't like to find the little springtails in your bathtub or in your kitchen sink. Sometimes you'll see them in there just because it's a wet area, or they'll come in from outside. But the roles of the arthropods, of course, is to shred that organic matter. They're going to mineralize the nutrients. They're breaking them down, so making it easier for the plant roots to uptake the nutrients that they need. It stimulates the microbes. It enhances that aggregation, which means basically your soil particles. It's working to aggregate those into smaller parts within the soil. They do burrow and some control pests. Now, if we think about a worm, you know, worms are okay. We don't really like grub worms. We don't want them because they turn into beetles that come out and eat our plants. But while they're in grub form, they're actually doing something beneficial while they're down there. They're aerating the soil and they're eating things and they're breaking down that soil and making compost. The burrowing, like your moles and your voles, you know, those are just pests that are going to have to be controlled somehow. And they're not easy to control. They are not easy to control at all. So earthworms, they of course, they mix, they aggregate the soil, they stimulate that I'm getting where I can't talk, microbial activity. They provide the channels through the soil, they increase the infiltration. So, and they bury and shred residue. So earthworm compost is one of the best things that you can put in your soil. And so if you dig and you've got worms and you're seeing other little critters down in your soil, you know that you've got a pretty healthy soil to start with. But if you dig it up and you've just got a clump of clay that's just solid, you've got some bad soil, and you need to add some of these critters back in to bring it back to life. So,
You know anything about the Asian jumping worms?
Yes.
I saw one in my yard last year. I did not know what
Yes.
it was, and I looked it up, and apparently it's a really bad.
yes,
Because it eats all the organic material.
yes, the question here in the class was about the Asian jumping worms, and we also have another one that's called a flathead worm. And they are somewhat of a threat, and we do have them both in Tennessee. They eat our natural earthworms. They eat the organic matter in the soil. Yeah. They can be very destructive. And we do have them here. So if you're digging around and you find some weird looking worms that don't look like our natural worms, kill them. You know, that's all you can do. Yeah, Department of Agriculture doesn't want them. I've had that question. I had somebody bring me some in, called up department. No, we don't want them. You know we have them. There's nothing we can do about it. You know, it's one of those things. So
How can you tell what they are? Is this a band on them?
they jump for one thing. We've found them. You've been involved with Plant the Campus Red, correct? Plant the Campus Red over at Austin P. We've found them over there a few times, digging just in the mulch beds, and they were fat and they were green, and I mean they just jump and go crazy. Not just like a normal worm. They're bigger and they're kind of greenish, gray, brown colored. Yeah, but you'll know they jump and squiggle and wiggle. So they're much different than our natural worms. So
They said they could be a threat to global warming. So much CO2.
oh, I guess that's true because they're eating so much. They're eating all that organic matter. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. It's something that we don't want, but they're not recommending any controls for it as of right now. So basically, our soil, it's a complex web of biology, the ecosystem. You have the nutrient cycling, you have nutrient retention, improved water relations, can help, a good soil is going to help with disease suppression. If you have a good, healthy soil, you have a good, healthy plant. It can also help degrade pollutants. As long as you have a healthy soil and it's got some of those microorganisms in there, and different types of plants will help pull up lead, like those heavy metals and things like that. You can use plants to clean up your soil. Let's see. And just supporting diversity in the soil. Again, just that addition of organic matter, range of food sources, meaning put a diversity of plants. Try to stay away from a monoculture by rotating your crops every year. If you're planting trees, plant a diversity. Don't plant all of one tree. Plant different types. Make considerations in your tillage decisions. Are you going to till? Are you going to minimum till, or are you just not going to till at all? How do you want to handle your soil on your site? And again, that's going to depend on the size. A large farmer is not going to want to get out there and hand till, double dig a whole acre to plant their corn, but you might do it in a site in your garden. Maybe you have a 10 by 10 plot. You can double dig that. It's good exercise. Good exercise. Let's see. And then look at the water and air relationships. We talked about that. We talked about compaction. So connecting the dots, just kind of summarize. What we've talked about tonight is basically good stewardship of the land. It's taking care of, you're putting back into the land what you're taking out. I mean, we're feeding ourselves, we're feeding the soil. And so that ecosystem gets balanced. And that's what you want in your garden. And if you can stay away, from chemicals, synthetics, and things like that, and use more organic matter, cover crops, composted manures, keep those residues, reduce your tilling, all those things improve your soil. And so your products that you're getting out of the garden are going to be healthier for you because you have a healthier soil. So they're drawing nutrients from that soil and they're going to be healthier. So if that makes sense. So Okay, and we've talked about bed preparation, mulching, organic management, irrigation practices. In Tennessee, I mean, you're gonna have to irrigate. I mean, if you want a good crop, you're gonna have to irrigate. And you know, at least once a week. Now, I don't like the little sprinkle baptisms. I usually tell people that I was raised Pentecost. We don't. We don't. We didn't sprinkle. He got dunked. So, so you want to make sure that you're fully watering your plants about once a week instead of giving them a little sprinkle every now and then. Fertilization tactics, don't over fertilize. If your plants are growing fine and they don't seem like they need a fertilizer, don't add it to it. You know, if you send off your soil test and it says you don't need phosphorus, don't put 10, 10, 10 down. Just put the nitrogen that it says to put on there. Don't put the extra on. Just avoid your, reduce your inputs, protect the environment. And let's see how far this goes into. Now we're going to talk about home orchards, but in anything that you plant, you're going to think about your site selection, the site preparation, using those cover crops if you need to rip the soil to get down through a subsoil or a compacted layer. There's tools out there to use that you can do that. Use those cover crops, mulches, and then you just your nutrient management. Okay, well, soil stewardship even impacts your fishing. And you probably noticed that if you've got ponds on your property and you've got somebody either with a farm field next to you or even a septic tank nearby, and that might be draining into your pond, you're going to see a lot of algae growth and other weeds and things like that. So nitrogen runoff can cause a lot of these problems that you see with ponds. And the main question I get is, what can I apply to clear up my pond? Well, yeah, they have shock products that'll clear it up temporarily. But if you have a continual runoff of nitrogen going into a farm pond, then you're going to continually have algae and other weeds and things like that. So you have to stop that flow of nitrogen and other nutrients into your pond. So as an example, I went and visited a person. He had a lot of problems going on. He just bought a piece of property, but he had a small pond and he had just removed the trees from all around it. And then as we started walking, well, the neighboring property had a horse barn and a big pile of compost. And there was a little line, little ditch of erosion going right straight down to his pond. And his pond was covered with algae and all these other things. So that was feeding the problems in his pond. So now to work that out with the neighbor, that was his job. You know, but that compost pile, you know, if you got good neighbors, well, hopefully neighbor would move the pile of manure, and that way it wouldn't be polluting this guy's farm or pond. Who knows if that happened or not. So, but it can affect the fish. You can get, you know, fish kill and of course your algae growth and such like that from over nutrients. Okay, so we just want to use this information to apply what our soil needs to supply our crops for optimum productivity without loss to the environment. And improving our soil through organic matter additions will benefit the physical, chemical properties, and that will have long-lasting dividends. So you're going to reap the effects of the healthier vegetables, the cleaner food, more nutritious food, stuff like that. Y'all are saying, thank goodness she's done. All right. Do we have any questions?
Yes. Is there a way to kill the grub worms?
Kill grub worms?
Yes.
Okay. The best time to treat for the grub worms is in August or September, after they've been out mating and laying their eggs. Because as it starts to get cold, those eggs pupate and they burrow down into the soil. So it's probably a little late now to put those products out. But usually August is a good time to put out a grub control product.
And what kind of product is that?
I would have to look it up. I try to stay away from chemical names, but I can look it up. But if you go into the garden center, you're just going to look for a lawn grub control product. And then you follow the label directions on how much to put down over a certain area.
Okay.
So,
Dr. Sudbury's here, he'll probably tell them that those are edible.
okay, that's true. We had mentioned that Dr. Sudbrink is coming. He's going to be talking about insects and he may bring some for us to eat.
Ooh,
Oh,
you can have some of mine.
you can keep that, huh? Okay, let me check the chat box here real quick, and see what we got.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, no, we don't have to do the mask. What about grub worms? Did I answer the grub worms good enough? This, where do they come from? Is that where do the grub worms come from, or where does what come from? This is from Jennifer. Okay, I'm not sure. Some of these invasive things, we just don't know where they come from. You know, they're brought over in imported plants. Like the worms that we've got, I believe came over in potting soil from plants from Asia. So our imports cause a lot of our problems. So if that was the question, so. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. Thank you for the good comments. I'm glad that you enjoyed hearing this. And one comment, it's good to hear the same sort of content in a different way. So it helps to explain it a little bit better, different person. So if y'all have any questions, just email me. I am working on that Google Drive. Right now I've tried to get everything over to Dropbox because my Google Drive is just not working right. So I've been trying to update that as I can. It has just been an extremely busy last week and a half. So thank you all for your patience, and we'll see you next week.